We are coastal communities. We are coastal provinces. How are we going to adapt to these real changes?
We have to adapt. Stopping it, I can't see it. We might slow it down, but I can't see it stopping.
Climate change is happening, and it's going to continue to happen no matter what we do. And we have to adapt to that now, rather than wait for a major event.
If there is an emergency situation that's beyond the capability of the community council to handle, the mayor would have to declare a state of emergency, then the EMO committee would take over.
We certainly saw an awful lot of that during Igor as well, with people just getting out and whatever resources they had, they were putting it into acting. And no outside government could have replaced that, on its own, certainly. So that local action was extremely critical.
I was here for Igor. Igor passed us by. We were kind of in a little window. But it tore the rest of the province apart on the East Coast, yeah. It was wicked. And frightening. I mean, you look at the damage it does.
Would we need heavy equipment to move trees off the road? Would we need crews with chainsaws, things of that nature, to cut it up, to remove it? Power, emergency generators? We have all the lists of all the people that we can contact and have the equipment at hand as required.
Hurricane Igor just missed us, went a little bit to the west of us, and all kinds of infrastructure that was supposed to be able to take, stormwater and so on, just didn't. And now they're talking about building back to a higher standard, bigger culverts, for example.
If culverts aren't maintained properly, then you get localized flooding. In proactive communities, when they know there's an extreme weather event coming, they're out checking the areas where they know problems can occur.
Well, I don't think there's any debate any longer that our climate is changing.
And this is where we're seeing the Insurance Bureau of Canada coming in with some very good, solid solutions now. Their tagline at the moment is that water is the new fire.
The insurance industry, the trends that we're seeing, it's very clear that we're getting more water more often and at peak times that increasingly is overwhelming our infrastructure.
This is coming back to adaptation. For most of Canada's history, we've seen fire in terms of building materials as a major problem. We seem to have come to grips with that. We've developed technologies and standards and laws to solve, or at least mitigate, that problem.
The focus of our industry is adapting to this and recognizing that today and tomorrow and next month there are going to be Canadians who will have their lives turned upside down from a risk that right now they're oblivious to.
Now the industry's saying it's water that's the new issue. So you have to have infrastructure. And so there are all sorts of green technologies now that allow us to deal with infrastructure.
And in that regard, we're working with Natural Resources Canada and with scientists to develop a very sophisticated diagnostic tool called the Municipal Risk Assessment Tool.
As simple as having a rain barrel where you don't have runoff, of having a minimum amount of building capacity on a private lot where you leave soil available instead of paving or building it all over, so having massive runoff, having storm drainage systems, having gray water systems.
It uses a data set from any given municipality and adds different climate scenarios based on how much precipitation climatologists expect to take place in the next 5, 10, 20, or 50 years to determine a risk profile of that community and to determine where the greatest potential is for infrastructure failure.
And we have a number of examples across the region that if adopted by government on a wholesale basis, would really quickly allow us to solve some of these pressing issues.
One of the biggest issues really is coastal development and where people want to put their cottages or their homes.
We had communities say to us, well, if there's no provincial policy on not building in floodplains, for example, or in areas that are sensitive to slope movement, then if we regulate people in our local land use regulations and the neighboring communities don't, then you see movement of people into areas where there are fewer regulations.
When you have our major cities in these vulnerable areas, planners are this frontline defense against these surges. So that common practice is one of a setback. Don't build there. If you're going to build there, then it should be a certain height. It should be a certain distance from the shoreline.
Everybody wants to be near the water and have a view of the water. And for municipal governments, it's often challenging to try to bring in land use plans or bylaws or guidelines where you limit the right of people to build wherever they want.
Well, if it doesn't say that in the legislation, you're always going to have someone, a developer, a resident who has the ability to pay, and they want to locate it. And we see example after example in community after community throughout Atlantic Canada.
The more the average citizen is aware of not only the risk today, but the risk in the future with sea level rise and perhaps increased storminess and storm frequency and intensity, then hopefully they would understand when municipalities try to put restrictions on how close they could build to the shoreline, either from flooding or erosion risk.
When it comes into investing millions of dollars in a seawall when that's required, or trying to create incentives to develop in appropriate areas, for example, then you need policy and you need higher level action.
How adaptive are our institutions in Atlantic Canada? How well do we learn from events or changes in the past, and do we modify our behavior to put us at a better advantage in the future when we're designing new policies and so on?
It's a big area of concern are the dikelands.
Subsidence hasn't stopped, and we're worried these days about ice melt and temperature swell doing things to the ocean so that the ocean level is actually going up while the land is going down. We're actually standing in an awkward place.
We've highlighted sort of lower spots along the dikes that could be problematic during storm surges. And if the government were to invest resources to build the dikes up, these would be some of the areas they'd want to target right away.
If you're right out on the Bay of Fundy, after they've built the dike up back to its 15, 20 feet height, they'll also then come out with huge rock, huge blocks of shale, and put that on the outside to kind of armor plate the outside of the dike from the actual pounding of the waves with each tide.
And perhaps these areas, it may be more cost effective for them to actually let it go or have some kind of a planned restoration activity, and we have a number of examples within the Bay of Fundy and also on the Atlantic coast.
It's hard, it's physical, you're resisting the force of the bay directly, it's constantly getting broken down and constantly you have to maintain it. A marsh is a natural process, it's a natural system, and you don't need to invest energy into it.
In the interest of sort of an ecological engineering solution, the more we can let the natural system work with this energy, the cheaper and probably ultimately maybe more reliable our resistance to sort of these storms is going to be.
And the idea here, I guess, being that in the event of a storm surge or whatnot, that the water is essentially sponged up by all this vegetation.
You need to have your community councils, you need to have your members of government working for the future.
Now, we have a town plan which prevents building in the floodplain in the future.
We do have our own official plan and bylaws, and we do issue our own building permits. And I think there should be a component in your building permit that addresses climate change and increased tidal and storm surges. And if you're going to build, it should be addressed.
I'm impressed with the way this community council works. They are very eager to see this community survive, even with it on the water like this.
We don't make the final decision on it. If someone applies for something within a floodplain area now, we will refer it to the Water Resource Division in St. John's. They will do the studies. If they say no, we say no.
I think some professional advice from the province in building code would be helpful.
They've had some serious damage around the province in various places. They had to move whole areas of towns and buy out the people and put them in new homes and so on. So they're much more concerned about this now.
One really interesting one is in Shediac, where now they're bringing forward within the municipal plan height bylaws and setback bylaws.
Beaubassin Est, which is a municipality, any new development has to be higher than the worst case scenario predicted out to the next 100 years.
The municipal plan has to embody what this community will look like 10 and 20 and 30 years down the road.
They're including into it sea level rise out to 2100, the worst case storm surge event, combined together, it gives you a level of, say, maybe let's say 4 meters above sea level.
It's through those abilities to recognize environmental change that we have to build those into our communities, and so it can be done.
Any new development now is restricted to above that level already. This is a first step. This is a very brave step that this municipality has taken, and more of that, I think, will be taking place.
Good planning and adaptation will take everybody into the future. No matter what you're doing, plan ahead and you're going to get there.
The climate change adaptation question, as well as the prevention, the mitigation side, is very complicated and varied. And you can't look to one branch of government or one level of government to say this is how we will fix it. It's going to require a lot of cooperation across levels of government with the private sector, with community and society, civil society organizations.
We've influenced climate in the past, and we're going to continue to influence in the future. So we should start adapting to what's coming now rather than wait.
We've had the international community looking at climate change. We now have a very strong set of indicators on a regional basis in Atlantic Canada. This is a wonderful opportunity for governments individually and collectively to come together and start putting those legislated pieces together and allowing for sustainable communities.
We have to be proactive and stop being reactive to these scenarios. And we've known a lot of these issues for a long time now. And so now it's time that we really have to financially commit to making some changes.
Leadership, we do need people to drive this. And the grassroots pressure and knowledge and awareness saying to these governments, get on with it and just don't play politics with it is really an important part of the process.
It's happening now. It's something that the world leaders are going to have to tackle. It's not something they can just throw a few dollars at and pretend it's going to go away.
If you're worrying about climate change, then you're at least ahead of the game. If you're putting off thinking about climate change, if you're putting off thinking about adaptation because you think perhaps climate change isn't occurring or will just turn back around, then you're setting yourself up for greater and greater costs when the climate change actually does occur.
With the climate debate, we're somewhat back compared with the lung cancer issue. There's a sort of latency period. And people can go on smoking and feel perfectly healthy and not know that they're committing themselves to some fatal illness 20 years down the road.
Change is the result of our actions. We've learned to burn things very well. We burn 90 million barrels of oil every day. If you take those barrels, you stack one on top of the other, you touch the moon in less than 3 days. That's how significant our consumption is. Now, moving away from that because of climate change or other good reasons, it's just a good thing to do. Why should we burn all this stuff in a few generations?
The rest of the climate change we're talking about isn't simple. There aren't just a few targets, and it's not even just coal and fossil fuels. It's a whole range of things, all woven through our lifestyle.
Man has become greedy. We've lost our way. We are not satisfied with what we have, and we want more and more and more and more, and there's no stopping us. We will not slow down.
I only hope our next generations ask those questions and take action on it. They don't become so involved in consumerism, capitalism as my generation did, where bigger, better, faster was always the right answer instead of quality, quality of life or values.
It has to be everyone coming together and say, here's this complex issue we're facing. What's our piece? And what's your piece? And how do we collectively address it?
We need more people to recognize that they too have a role to play, because this is an issue not just for the insurance industry or not just for government. This is an issue that as a society we need to understand, recognizing that each of us have a piece of the puzzle that we can contribute to dealing with this in an effective way.
I do think that climate change adaptation ultimately has to be led by the community, and that we need to use all this scientific research and data to find the solutions that make the most sense for our own individual communities, and only we can decide what those are.
If we learn that it's possible to do something and we don't do it, that will be a measure of our lack of intelligence. But if we learn of something that's to our betterment and we can do it, it's within our reach economically, then not only will we be better off regardless of how old we are, but our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be very thankful. We can do it.
Everybody has a pitch in this one. Everybody, not just a handful. Everybody has to pitch in to teach the benefit, foundation of living, which will be maintain the earth to the best of our ability.
And adapt and pass it on to the next generation is what we should do.